Good evening and welcome, and thank you for attending this first community meeting for the Creek Trail Network Expansion Master Plan Project. My name is Ralph Garcia, City of Santa Clara Public Works Project Manager for the Creek Trail Master Plan. I want to thank Councilmember Hardy and Councilmember Jane for attending tonight. So this meeting will be recorded and posted online on the project webpage at santaclaraca.gov/Creek Trail Plan. If you have any questions or comments, you can also email me at rgarcia1@santaclaraca.gov. I'm going to go over a few slides on how to use Zoom for those attending at home. If you're attending this meeting on Zoom, you can rename yourself by clicking on the participants window. There will be an opportunity to ask questions at the end of the presentation. We will answer any questions from the audience in the council room and on Zoom by using the raised hand feature. If you're calling in, you can dial *9 to speak during the Q&A session. If you're on Zoom, you can also type your question in the Q&A module, and we will read your questions during the Q&A segment of the presentation. So for tonight's agenda, we are going to introduce the project team. We'll provide an overview of what will be accomplished with this project. We will share the project schedule and look ahead at future public meetings. We'll also share a link to a project survey we are conducting to see how the public use trails and the trail elements the public would like to see included in future trail designs. As mentioned, there'll also be a Q&A and a time for comments at the end of the presentation. So this slide just shows the city staff that are working on the project. As mentioned, my name is Ralph Garcia, Senior Civil Engineer and Project Manager for this project. Tonight, we also have Nicole He, Associate Engineer, who's helping on the project. Online on Zoom, we have Steve Chan, Transportation Manager. Mike Liu and Carol Chariot are also helping on this project. And now I would like to introduce Jana Sokal, who will, is our project consultant and will take you through the rest of the slides. Jana, please.
Thank you very much, Ralph and Nicole. My name is Jana Sokal, and I'm the principal planner for the Creek Trail Expansion Network Master Plan. The slide you see before you indicates the large team of consultants that are actually working on the project, everyone from traffic engineers to civil and structural engineers, hydrogeomorphologists who study creek and waterways, geotech engineers, and surveyors. This master plan encompasses 3 different study areas within the city of Santa Clara. They include Calabasas Creek, which includes one of the city's parks at its terminus. It includes Saratoga Creek, which includes numerous parks along the route, and the Hetch Hetchy Corridor, which is the approximately 80-foot right-of-way that is owned by the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, which is where we convey water from Hetch Hetchy up near Yosemite all the way down to San Francisco. If these trails were to develop, similar to the San Tomas Aquino Creek Trail, you would have a variety of off-street routes throughout the city connecting to many important visitor centers, to businesses and colleges, as well as to other local trails that are built, including the Guadalupe River Trail and the San Francisco Bay Trail. So this study builds upon work that the city undertook about 10 years ago, which was to first study the feasibility of these corridors. This work builds on that and it expands to try and look at actual design, conceptual design of how a trail would be routed along these lands. It also does a lot to outreach to stakeholders who may own or control the land. Not much of the land that we're talking about is owned by the city of Santa Clara. Much of it is owned by San Francisco Public Utilities, by Valley Water, by other jurisdictions, even some private owners, Caltrain, Union Pacific Railroad that conveys the Capitol Corridor line as it comes into the Stars and Stripes area. So it's really a process of working with your partners to be able to facilitate development. Again, not unlike the San Tomas Aquino Creek Trail that the city successfully built a number of years ago. We want the trail system to honor the creeks. We want the trail system to link with the on-street system so it expands and builds upon that. And we really want to engage the community in thinking about what's possible. These are the different studies that have been undertaken or are in process. We are at the beginning of the public outreach phase. This is just a very general map of the corridor feasibility as figured out in 2013. Anything you see there in green has the potential to have a trail. Anything that you see in purple really requires an on-street alignment, a bypass. And anything you sort of see in pink is there's just really no opportunity anywhere in the corridor or per se on the roads to be able to create a trail. Very limited land. And I'll talk a little bit about that with each corridor. One of the first things we do when we look at developing trails is how much land is available and who owns it, who has easements on it, what kind of habitat conditions exist. And nowadays, we're also looking at climate change and how that will impact portions of the trail all around the bay. We looked at bridges. And when I say we looked at bridges on the two creeks where we have bridges spanning the waterways. And when we had bridges that had no ability to open up, oftentimes those areas were inaccessible for creating an underpass under the trail. And as you can see from this slide, that's a box culvert. There's no ability to lay back walls to create an underpass. And the streets you see listed were not possible for a trail underpass, which means either you're doing a tunnel adjacent to the creek or you're doing a pedestrian overpass in order to create a grade separated system. Here is an opportunity where you can lay back the creek bank underneath the bridge. And as long as you've got enough vertical clearance to meet Caltrans bike clearances, you potentially can build a successful trail underpass. Those are some of the sites where you potentially can build as long as you can continue to also pass flood flows. There's habitat sensitivity in riparian corridors. And these are just a few of the sensitive species that live in different parts of Santa Clara. The other thing that we have with sensitivity, particularly along Saratoga, is when Saratoga underwent flood control improvements in the 1980s, the creek was widened out to pass more flow. And after that, in order to mitigate for the loss of vegetation, new trees were planted and it was designated a vegetation preserve through much of Saratoga Creek. Trail construction takes time. As you know, in Santa Clara, it took a decade or more, maybe even close to 15 years to build the San Tomas Aquino Creek Trail. It was built in reaches or in phases. Those phases had logical ending and beginning points that would connect into the on-street system, but it takes some time. And it takes time because you're working with partners, you're working with permitting agencies, resource agencies, And you're having to raise the funds to do it. So now I'm going to take you through each one of the corridors and just give you a sense of what's out there and what the preliminary concepts are for each. Let's start with Calabasas. So Calabasas begins upstream at around Prune Ridge and extends all the way down to the Bay Trail underneath Highway 237. This map, in general, areas that are red, we didn't have enough land availability for a pathway, or if you see a bright red dot, those were some of those underpasses I mentioned earlier where we couldn't put a trail underpass beneath that bridge. So you can see, just in general, a lot more of the blues and greens, sort of from El Camino down to the bay, and quite a bit of red as we're moving more inland. Part of that is associated with the city's historic land use development, where much of the areas north of 101 were residential, and things were built very close to the creek. Things that were built later gave more space to the creek and levee setbacks. So it's just a lot to do with how we built as a society over the past 50 years. Calabasas Creek has 5 potential underpasses. One of those was really recently built with a joint project between the city of Sunnyvale and Santa Clara. That's at Old Mountain View Alviso Road, and you can see the construction photos there. That was set to allow bicycle passage and pedestrian passage underneath the bridge. We'd still have to formalize the ramps and be permitted for that purpose, but it gives you a sense of how long-term planning plays into all projects that you think to do. There are 3 pedestrian overcrossings that would need to occur in order to remain a grade separated trail. The first one is really at Highway 101, working from upstream to downstream. No potential to go under 101, unlike what you have at San Tomas Aquino. The next would be at Central Expressway. And the final one, and the most complicated one, would be at Caltrain, which is now electrified. And it's just very limited land in that area. There are also 6 at-grade crossings. Most of those are, many of those are already in play with the on-street bike improvements that have been made along Calabasas Boulevard, and we would continue to use those. A couple that are the furthest upstream, there's really no land to even warrant an underpass because we just don't have top of bank on either side. So challenges, 3 overcrossings is a big price tag. Sea level rise has the potential to impact the downstream reaches. You know, as sea level is rising, we're getting more inundation in the lower trail underpasses all the way around the bay. So their serviceability is becoming a bit more questionable in time. And we think about that. I will say there's one thing not mentioned on this slide, and that is that Valley Water is also thinking of changing the configuration of the downstream ends of San Tomas Aquino and Calabasas with a habitat restoration project that integrates with Pond A8 in that area. And we're thinking about that as well when we talk about Calabasas. Another opportunity and or challenge. Here's a potential, one potential alignment that would allow for an overpass at 101. This would require some right-of-way out of the street of Mission College Boulevard in order to double back that switchback. The overpass cannot be built in the lower floodplain because it would be a flood impediment. And here's a potential concept of a trail underpass under Kiefer. That's a unique underpass. It has different configurations on both sides of the stream. opportunities, grade separated trails, I believe encourage more cycling, especially from novice and beginner cyclists. And that's one of the strongest points for them. Much of Calabasas uses existing elevated levee similar to San Tomas Aquino, and there are fewer issues with building in an area that's already been highly disturbed. Let's see, the photo on the right is looking downstream. You can see Old Mountain View Alviso Bridge in the background. And then the photo on the right is where Hetch Hetchy comes across Calabasas. And Hetch Hetchy is built on the Sunnyvale side. And it's just a nice view. And even though there's this lovely pathway down in the floodplain that you see there, that is Valley Water's maintenance access road, and it routinely floods in the winter. So it's not a place for a trail. We would be behind the flood wall up higher. This is Calabasas Creek as it flows along Calabasas Boulevard, sort of in the heart of the city. It's lined with eucalyptus and oleander. This is an old shot. I have a new shot, but I didn't like it, of the new bike boulevards that are on Calabasas. But one opportunity when you build trails, there are impacts, both from the construction and from the placement of humans and trails in habitat areas. And sometimes you have to mitigate. So one of the things we looked at with this study was also where could we maybe find mitigation? And if we were to re-green part of the city and widen this area out, taking away concrete, you could potentially create some mitigation to offset the human disturbance impacts of trail development within the city. And those are just two different concepts. Well, they're the same concept, but two different areas. When you move upstream of El Camino to Pomeroy, it has a different channel and street width. So we worked with both of those and ran these through hydraulic modeling to see that they would be feasible. And indeed, it looks like it would be, but again, it would be a significant partnership between the city and Valley Water to achieve this. All right, we're going to switch from a creek setting to Hetch Hetchy. We don't have water here, but we cross 3 channels with Hetch Hetchy. Oh, and I should say, how did I do that? Oh my. Let me just quickly go back. Okay, here we are. You will see there's a big green line at Hetch Hetchy, right? So there's 80 feet of right-of-way. We've got plenty of ability to put asphalt in that area. What we can't put in that area are any columns or support structures that would go beneath the ground because we've got Hetch Hetchy pipelines in the ground there. Okay. Wherever we cross a road, we're generally at grade, but you can't cross a railroad track at grade. So the one pedestrian overcrossing that's here would be, and it's the most complicated of all 4 that we've studied. This would be at the Union Pacific, possibly future high-speed rail, long range, yeah, maybe, and Lafayette Street. And then there would be one additional bike ped bridge spanning San Tomas Aquino Creeks, because you would extend from Calabasas through the Hetch Hetchy right-of-way or private property on either side of the right-of-way to San Tomas, to the connection there, and then all the way through Ulastuck to the Guadalupe River Parkway. These are the at-grade crossings. They would require changes to signals, but feasible. That's what the corridor looks like behind Great America. You can see the 80-foot width. This is another shot, a couple shots of the corridor. You can see Levi Stadium, the back of Levi Stadium. You can see the Capitol Corridor train coming through. And this is where the city has developed a small bike path. That's a reroute of the San Tomas Aquino. It's also a trail that gets you into the back of the station, the Capitol Corridor station. Just gives you a sense of what it's like. So we have limitations to what you can and can't do on a right of way. You also cannot plant trees on the Hetch Hetchy right of way. Even though there's some there now, you cannot get away with doing that these days. We have a lot of issues with maybe passing Levi Stadium. You have a new opportunity in the sense that Great America Theme Park is going to close. And maybe finding passageway through that land through a development agreement is an ideal solution to be outside of the Levi Stadium security perimeter. Yes, thank you. I mentioned the big challenges crossing Lafayette and the railroad. And then there are elevation changes, right? And that grade changes because of the elevated levees at Guadalupe, San Tomas, and Calabasas, but manageable. Opportunities, it's this nice sort of east-west connector. Goes to San Jose, goes to Sunnyvale and Mountain View, connects all of these trails together. And it may even be that just pieces of it are useful to you. And honestly, there's one piece that people use already, and that's people walk and bicycle through Ulastac. And there is actually a ramp that goes up to the Guadalupe River Parkway, and people are using that now. We would improve that. That ramp doesn't meet ADA, but pieces of it are being used. Okay, let's move on and go back to the creeks and go to Saratoga Creek. In this map, you see really two sections of the channel that are highly constrained. The upstream section from Prune Ridge up to Stevens Creek, very little land available. And then there's another stretch where housing as well as the flood control improvement projects have really squeezed the land. And that's from Benton all the way down to the back of Cabrillo School. I think it's Raggio that's back there. And the back of one of the city parks in that area. Let me show you some photos. So there's potential undercrossings at Homestead and Kiley. Both of these would impact a significant number of trees and vegetation within the vegetation preserve of Saratoga Creek. There's potential for a bike bridge at the end of Stevenson, which is the backside of Home Ridge Park. And we had planned that when the Baptist church that faces Forbes was under redevelopment, and we thought we would be able to negotiate a trail passageway there. So you'd go from Stevenson out to Forbes. That project was pulled and hasn't happened, but we still have it in the plan because if it does redevelopment, that would be a great place to go. And then there's some at-street crossings. I will say, here's a picture of looking underneath Homestead Road from Home Ridge Park. The challenges have brought us to some conclusions between staff and the consultant team that in these areas where we really have no top of bank, we had developed, and we'll show you this in the next series of meetings, we had developed some on-street alignments. We're not sure there's a high utility for those alignments when you already have San Tomas Expressway, which is extension of the San Tomas Aquino Creek. You already have Calabasas Boulevard. To put something else in between those on smaller streets may or may not be useful. So we'll share it with the public, but we're seeing less potential there. I mentioned the challenge of the vegetation preserve and the limited top of bank, and there's a couple photos that show you that. Then the opportunities, Saratoga Creek connects a lot of your parks. Again, historic land use patterns were that parks were set against creeks to take advantage of that beautiful setting. And there are not many places in our communities in a heavily urbanized Silicon Valley where you can experience nature. And so that's a really lovely opportunity. Moving forward, because this is an overview of what's possible, we're going to do a deeper dive into each one of the corridors at the upcoming meetings. You can see those dates. I think they're all going to be held here. And then we will do another series of meetings, taking your feedback in the fall, and we'll circulate a draft master plan, and then eventually a final master plan coming forward. All of this is on the city's website. And then I would encourage anyone at home and here to take the Creek Trail Master Plan survey. The survey will be open until June 22nd, and it's just a way to give us a little bit of feedback on what you think of these types of trail projects. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Ralph for questions and answers.
Anna? So we'll open it up to questions here and online. If anyone has questions, we're happy to answer anything you have. Since we're online, I have to bring a microphone to you so people at home can hear.
This is Craig Larson, Santa Clara resident since '83. I was a little bit surprised by the crossing underneath 101, because currently you can hike that area. I know that's a little bit in a floodplain, but I don't know if the criteria you're using to gauge that trail is the same criteria that was used when you did the Saratoga San Tomas, Creek Trail, because currently you go along the length of that path, that creek trail, you're going to encounter, when you do have recent rains, it's going to flood underneath Scott, it's going to flood underneath the 101, it's going to flood underneath Mission, and maybe one other location. Some of those have not only the undercrossing, but the overcrossing, so you have a way to go. 101 does not have that. So you're stuck with, you got water there, you can wade through it, which I've done, or whatever means you have. So and because the volume of water, or the basin that drains into Calabasas is so much less than what drains into Saratoga and San Tomas, it surprises me a little bit that a lot less water. That when you get upstream on Calabasas, there are many times that corridor is concreted, completely dry.
Yes.
Look right now today, it's like completely dry.
Well, it's not. I was just there, but there's a little bit of flow there, but not a, yeah. But I can answer that for you. 101 on Calabasas was built essentially with a box culvert. So when you walk under there, they're vertical walls, right? And there's 3 bays, and there's support structures in the center. So there's 3 bays there. It's not like San Tomas Aquino, which were laid back walls that was essentially a lining. These walls physically support 101. So we cannot cut into them to create more space. So the walls that were like this, we could rip this out, and there were pier supports for the bridges behind. That would open it up so we could accept more flood flow. If we were to try and build under 101, we would be filling, and that would change both the cross-sectional area for water to flow, as well as it would change the hydraulics of how the water moved through there. And we determined that that was not feasible. And it's, again, because of the nature of that structure and what it supports. And it would require, sometimes I suggest rebuilding a bridge. But the cost of rebuilding 101, yeah. No. So actually, in this case, it's probably cheaper to build an overpass. Yeah, 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 you're welcome. It's a great question, because we can walk under there, right? We certainly can.
Look at that section between. It's from.
Yes. 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 Yep. Yep. We need a creek cleanup day.
Saturday.
Oh, probably working.
Another question is, what, if any, experience have you or your company
I did the feasibility, the master plan, and I worked on the design of all of it. Yep, yep. I am. Yep.
Masakino Creek goes past 37? So select.
Sure. So I'm not 100% up to speed on every change, but in general, Santa Moss and Calabasas are levied, straightened structures. And when they go out underneath 237 and then what is the Bay Trail, which used to be 237 historically, they're very rectilinear. And they make a sort of almost like a rectangle around a marsh that's a mitigation site called it's the Harvey Marsh. Okay. And then they both connect to the slough. And it's this part and the connection to the slough that they want to make more natural, more sinuous. And the project, if you want to learn more about it, I would encourage you to go to the Valley Water website and get involved in that project because it could use, public input. It would also be an adaptation type project for how we address sea level rise on lower reaches.
What would you consider the tidal zones?
Oh, well, you can sort of tell the tidal zone by the change in the vegetation. So one, you can go out and actually see the tide come in, and that, the tide is highest in June and January when you get king tides. So those are really good times to go in. But the vegetation changes from a freshwater to a brackish to a fully saline. But that tidal exchange comes up 237 Old Mountain View LV. So Tasman, it doesn't make it to 101, but it makes it quite a ways up. And it's surprising. And, much less so as it gets further upstream, but you get tidal influence quite a ways in. And with sea level rise, we're expecting that will increase. Yeah.
Currently on Santa Masakino, once you get almost to a little bit to Tasman or the stadium, that's the tidal effect is almost zero at that.
Yeah, it's brackish outside the stadium, right? Where you get this combination of cattails and tules growing. So cattails represent fresh water. Tules represent more that brackish water. And then you start to get into cordgrass represents purely saline, a tidal exchange area. Yeah.
Are there any current areas along Calabasas where there's a waterfall? Right. So on Santa Masakino, you have two places where there are waterfalls and there's no current fish ladder. So my concern would be, if you want to help the fish, is to, if there are waterfalls along Calabasas, I'm not aware that already to include plans for some type of fish ladder.
Not that I'm aware of. The two that are on Santa Masakino were sort of grade control structures. One's at the confluence, right? And one's at Scott. And you're absolutely right. Fish cannot get by them.
Yeah, one's also the Caltrain directly underneath where Caltrains crosses.
There's one,
That's another one
there's another one there at Caltrain
by Walsh. Yeah.
by Walsh. Okay, right. There's nothing that I know of like that on Calabasas. But you never know. And there are other fish impediments on Calabasas, so not those, but where you have just pure sheet flow. Where you've got a box culvert and the bottom of the box is pure flat concrete and it's a long distance. It's really hard to navigate that. And if it sheet flows across, you don't have enough space and you've got equal velocity. Anyways, so there's all kinds of things that could be improved.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Daniel Karpolovich. I actually live in Sunnyvale, but a 4-minute bike ride from the intersection of Hetch Hetchy and Calabasas. So I ride on both of those nearly every day. I work in North San Jose, so I commute parallel to Tasman. So Hetch Hetchy would be like amazing for me, like unbelievably amazing. Calabasas as well, because there's really few good crossings of 101. So there's, you know, there's you have to go like 2 miles in either way to get across 101 safely, either at Borregas or San Tomas. So I can't underestimate the importance of both of those projects. I know we've been talking about some challenges about how to, you know, cross certain streets. I've noticed that El Camino Real was one of the at-grade crossings on Calabasas and Saratoga. That scares me a little bit. What would that look like? Would that be put up a hawk signal and hope for the best, or would that be like a fully controlled intersection with, you know, priority for bikes, or what would that look like?
Not 100% sure.
Okay.
It depends on what we anticipate would be the volume of use for the trail and how that would go through Caltrans signal warrant. Mind you, right now there's bike box and bike lanes on Calabasas. How that would change, again, would sort of depend upon a reanalysis. Mind you, if all of Calabasas opens all the way to the Bay Trail and you've got quite a bit of use, that would generate a need for more deference to bikes and pedestrians. If there's a lower use, it's going to be more deference to the car, right? And to the buses. So it depends. And I will be honest with you, in my work on many trails around the Bay, and good examples would be Stevens Creek, San Tomas. A lot of people going north to get to places where they work because of the land use pattern. Fewer people are coming upstream into the residential. So when you do bike counts along these routes, oftentimes it slows, you know, it falls off a little bit as you get closer into the city. But you never know. Every site is different. Thanks for your feedback on how you commute and what would be useful to you.
Absolutely. So
That would be-
I take I have like the VTA Orange Line, biking on Tasman, and biking on like El Viso, or not El Viso, sorry, Agnew, sort of, you know, just south of Tasman.
Yep.
So this would be amazing. One concern I have about Hetch Hetchy corridor is CPUC and how, or sorry, not CPUC. Who are the
SFPC, you're right.
SFPUC. Oh, I was close.
Yeah.
How interested or how willing are they to go along with this in your estimation?
So we met with them.
Okay.
And I can say that 30 years ago, they were more open to trail projects and they didn't charge us for the use of their land. Now, in order to respond to their ratepayers and the cost of doing business, when they decide to give permission and enter into a joint use agreement with a city or a county or any other entity to provide trail access, They will charge the city a small fee to use that trail, and they'll also require the city be willing to dismantle their infrastructure at any time that those lines need to be worked on. And in the design of a trail on Hetch Hetchy, you would want to minimize any impact to where they have lay down work areas for construction projects, but also recognizing that any point in time, if we had a big event, we had a big earthquake, who knows what would happen and what we would need to do, right? And even in routine maintenance, you can foresee as much as you can, but you can't at some point in time. So they would strongly prefer that we work on the margins of their right of way, or better yet, wherever the city has an opportunity to get a development agreement, which benefits new high-tech business or new high-density housing, we move the trail just to their side of the right of way. Yeah.
I guess, how often does like construction or major work actually happen? I absolutely recognize the need to have that access in an emergency or, earthquake or whatever.
Not often.
Not, to me, it doesn't seem like
Yeah.
it's all that often, but it's more of like, we need it just in case.
Yeah, it's not just in case. There's definitely routine maintenance that takes place. A lot of that you don't see on the surface, right?
Right.
But you need to get trucks in, you need to get equipment in, and then you have to plan for what is absolutely critical to providing water to the Bay Area, right? You have to take all of those things into consideration. But at the same time, they have a wonderful resource that potentially can be used in a broader way.
How do you foresee that? I know, in a few areas there, how do you foresee there's areas where there's parking lots that go like on that right of way? Like, can we just like fence it off, put a dash yellow line down the middle and be like done with it? Or does that like change of use mean that now they have the right to re-envision how they see that space being used?
There's another party involved in that discussion, and that's every private landowner who has the parking lot.
Right. It's like
Right?
an
'Cause they've
easement or
made an
something?
agreement with SFPUC to expand, to use that as parking, and they've deemed that an acceptable use, right? And they've paved it all over. Lots of examples of that all around. And then we come along, the city comes along and wants to have another use. So the best opportunity is to work with private property landowners to come up with something that you can then take to SFPUC. And in many instances in the North Bay Shore area, you have a lot of redevelopment going on, and you've got some big specific plans out there that open the door for that.
Excellent. I mean, I would maybe suggest that if we have, let's say, you can imagine the right of way going through the edge of a parking lot, and like the last like row of parking is the right of way, and then there's more parking lot, wherever. Like maybe we can work with those landowners to put the trail through another part of that parcel or another part of that parking lot, leaving the Hetch Hetchy corridor as a parking lot. But for the landowners there, it's the same. They're losing X amount of parking spaces. But to us, it means that we now don't have to bother SFPUC with that section.
True, true.
Is that something that we could look at?
Yes. And we have had, I didn't put a slide up to that effect tonight, but we've had lots of discussions with property owners all out in that area about that very subject. Yeah.
I have more questions, but I'll let other people ask them and I'll come back later if we have time. No, go ahead.
We don't have anyone raising their hand, but we can open up for online attendees. Okay. Oh, actually, I do have a hand up now. We want to take.
No.
Okay.
I can blab on for an hour, but
We can be here after the meeting if you want to come up and ask us.
And we
questions.
might have some online questions too that we want to get to.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, you asked for it. So I'm the chair of the BPAC right now. So obviously this is something I care a lot about and I've been checking a lot of different things. I was a little surprised and would like to know why we're not talking about the San Tomas Aquino. It stops now at Homestead. I know there was plans to take it all the way down to Stevens Creek. I'm surprised this wasn't part of what you were talking about. Should I stop there? And do you want to take each question or do you want me to bombard you all?
You can take each question.
Yeah, one at a time.
We talked to Santa Clara County Roads and Airport Division, and they are looking into extending the San Tomas Aquino Creek Trail south of Homestead Road. So that's a separate project
So it's a separate. Okay.
led by the county.
Okay. Calabasas. Very close to my house, where I go to get to school. About 10 years ago, when they changed the striping on it and put the bike trail on the inside, I noticed something. Less people started using it. Because right at Machado, it crosses back out. And that's a problem. And I talked to people that were on the BPAC at that point when and they said, well, we thought it would help because then you wouldn't have all those driveways. And I said, there's very few driveways on Calabasas. The problem is those eucalyptus trees drop junk year round. And with all the roots, they have made it very bumpy. That doesn't bother a car. When you get past Machado and we have the eucalyptus trees there and the 2.5 foot buffer, the line, and then the buffered bike lane and the parking, I see more people actually using that, which is, and I drive up and down that all the time. And I have neighbors who bike, who tell me, take it back to the way, they're fine with losing, quote, a lane, but putting that on the inside is a problem. And I've had no one tell me, oh no, leave it, it's really smart. So I have put in my request for when we do resurface that, because it is paint, we can fix that. There is a little bit of signage and there's a little bit of strange infrastructure right at El Camino at grade. Because I look at it and it confuses me. And I know what they were trying to do. But I think whenever someone's confused, they're either going to make a mistake or they're not going to take it. So that's number 2. Okay, the distance from the stadium on the Hetch Hetchy, it was a question because I do know, in fact, I was just in a meeting this afternoon asking the same question. We do know that we have a 100-foot safety perimeter. We are trying to find out if it's larger for FIFA. That has not been discussed yet. It might be. But I personally have not been real happy with our detour that we have right at, it's at Agnew. And if you don't have a ticket, you can't go any further. And that's for every single time we have an event. And that's often weekends when people do want to use this. So now we take them through the neighborhood, through the middle of the parking lot, past the Caltrain station, and then it gets a little bit better on the road that Related made that has a bike trail. But that other part, I did fuss and they have done better signage, but it's still not great. So I walked it about 2 or 3 weeks ago because I had a different plan. Because when I asked about the Hetch Hetchy 2 or 3 years ago, I was told they didn't want anything on it. Maybe you got a different answer. I got told no, emphatically. So I started looking at a better detour and found a couple things. So if you either at Agnews, you turn left, and we have the bike trail along there, and you go back to Mission College. Mission College, we have a bike trail right up to the opening of Mission College. And then I've gone over there and talked with them because they have no bike trails whatsoever. And they recognize that. And I'm working with them right now to put paint down to make a bike trail along the north part, which backs up to the Patrick Henry, because the Calabasas Creek stops right there, drops right onto their campus. And it's not bad. There's a little bit of surfacing needs to, I took some pictures, there's a little surfacing. So I walked the whole thing to see how it was. It was fine until you got to Tasman. Because Tasman, you have the train. Yes, there is a way to go underneath there, but it's not well done. Yeah, I walked it and I walked around the other way. Yeah,
The only thing at Tasman now is a passageway for maintenance.
yeah. And I walked it, and I did see a few intrepid cyclists that did take it. You keep going, and yeah, it's overgrown. You're right, it's just maintenance. And you get to the other side, but they've closed off Tasman on the other side at grade. And it's gravel from then on. It's not paved at all. So even if you took somebody up and got back up to grade, past, and then I walked it.
So if the Calabasas Creek Trail were to come to fruition, like the San Tomas Aquino Creek Trail, you'd go underneath these roadways,
Come on.
and then you'd come up to the top of the levee, and then you'd also have access to the street to go in both directions.
Right.
Right.
And there is, right now they have it blocked off and it is gravel.
Correct, because it's not
Yeah,
necessarily.
because it's not
open.
used. It's
Right,
not
exactly.
supposed to be. So I kept walking it. I walked all the way to 237. There were a few more bicyclists who were behind me and took it. I did notice them. But it also was very similar. It was dirt. There, it does take you right to the Bayland Bike Trail, little tiny break in the gate. That's all there was. Now, I did come up with another way at grade that Santa Clara can do something very quickly for a better detour once we get Mission College to connect these, because we can go at Tasman, you can turn right, go, and there's a bike trail there, and cross at Patrick Henry. And you can take Patrick Henry all the way up to Alviso Mountain View Road, turn right, and you can get back on the creek trail, San Tomas Creek Trail. Much easier. That's something we may need to do for the detour, especially during FIFA and things like that. So I did walk it. So that's why I was surprised to hear you talk about Hetch Hetchy, because when I tried, they were pretty crabby. And that's saying it nicely. The last part, I think I got through all of them. All right.
Sorry, who was, can you say in particular who didn't want the Hetch Hetchy?
Well, I'm on the Bosca board,
Mhm.
and even chatting with them, they said, no, that's not going to happen, because it's the Bosca part of Hetch Hetchy, even though it's SFPUC. Now, the CEO just changed over this last year. I was going to try again.
Actually, I had been working with the 49ers to try to get a better detour. And they had actually hired Fair and Pierce to do a whole study. And they said, no way, SFPUC is not going to let you do anything on the Hetch Hetchy route. So you guys have made much better progress than even the 49ers. I have a number of questions. Do you want to go, Betsy? Okay. The first thing is, Irvine is doing a big housing project at Mission College along the trail. And what they're saying is along the San Tomas Aquino Trail there. And what they were, it's on Mission College Boulevard over by Great America. And what they said was that they didn't want to build a lot of retail there because people could just easily bike along the trail to get to Santa Clara Square, where there's the Whole Foods and a bunch of things. But it doesn't seem safe to me. And so what I was wondering is, what is our ability to put lights on the trail? What kinds of state can we use? Motion sensing lights? I mean, if someone's biking on there with their bright lights, we have lights on the trail anyway, right? So what is the impact on wildlife of putting a lighting system, at least under the underpasses? Because I think those are very dangerous at night.
I'm going to answer in a few different ways. First, I'm going to say that housing developers these days assume everybody's going to be carless. That is a lofty goal, but it is not 100% accurate. And what we're seeing is that there's a desire to put in maybe less infrastructure around cars because it gives them more space for greater density and ultimately fewer amenities. You might get on the trail to go for coffee. You might get on the trail to go to a concert, but you're not going to get on the trail to do other things. I might even grocery shop on it, but I'm not going to do a big shop on it. So you have to question the motivation. Okay. Then
Well, we're trying to
we have to respect that creek trails, not Hetch Hetchy, but creek trails are the only habitat left for wildlife, right? That's it. And those corridors are used by wildlife and a lot at night. The Stevens Creek corridor conveys mountain lions from the mountains all the way out to NASA. And we see mountain lions out there on occasion, a rare occasion. So I will tell you that I am biased and that I do not believe there should be lighting 24 hours a day on a trail. And in limited places where lighting is permitted, it turns off at 10. And most of the places that you can do lighting are on pedestrian overpasses. Caltrans tends to require that. Underpasses, which are closer to wildlife, also flood. They're not a great place to put electricity. So you have to be very careful with always wanting to change physical environments always to the sole benefit of the human, right? And so that's a hard decision you have to weigh as an elected official, but I'm just saying that there's part of the beauty of creek trails is having habitat. So you got to look at those two things. And I can also see that both of you are struggling with issues that are a little bit outside of the work that I'm doing within the framework of this master plan, but they're super important questions that I'm so glad you're tackling.
Do we have like an ecologist that we can, say the color of the light or the lighting levels or something?
Well, you're lucky because I'm actually a biologist in training
I see.
and have done quite a bit of work on human disturbance impact. So you get a trail planner in May, but you also get that.
I see.
And there are many things you can do with lighting. You can downcast it, you can turn it off, you can make it dimmer, you can, but honestly, safety on a trail is a reflection of the safety within the general community. You don't get a difference. And cyclists, I ride at night, the dead of night. I'm all lighted up. I can see exactly where I'm going. And I can see far ahead of me. And then I pass and I leave, and that area is left for the wildlife. There are great engineers who focus just on lighting, but still putting it literally in the corridor when they only have so much space left is a challenge. Gotcha. Yeah.
Got it. Uh,
What if we do like we've done with the crosswalks, where we have the little flags and we just have a bucket of flashlights? And so at night, everyone just takes a flashlight and then puts it in the bucket at the end when they get off the trail.
I'm never going to stop for a flashlight myself. But, you know, most people who are cycling have all the lights they need. Yeah, yeah. Now where the true stories coming out.
So with regard to Hetch Hetchy, at Lafayette, we have to, you said you can't do a at-grade crossing there.
You can't cross the rail line.
But what if we signalized it, just like put gates and all of that?
Well, I'll tell you what, if you really wanted to pursue that,
Yeah,
if you really wanted to pursue that, I think the only way that they would entertain it is if you said you were going to get rid of another crossing somewhere else in the city of Santa Clara. They're not allowing for that. And I just don't even think they would, because the volume of people in a trail, and I could talk to you offline about this in much greater detail than I want to respect everybody's time tonight, but I'd be happy to stay after and have that conversation with you
okay,
and share with you some other statistics.
okay. So one of the things I had been trying to do was to widen the Santa Masa Creek Trail, because it's kind of only wide enough for a bike in each direction. So if you have pedestrians, you know, and there's a lot of people that use it. There's a lot of employees that walk it during their lunchtime. And I was told that's virtually impossible because you have to deal with the Army Corps and the Open Space District and the Water District. And so,
The only way to widen that trail is to widen the entire levee from the base all the way up on the outboard side to FEMA standards. Massive undertaking. Massive. And I can talk to you offline about that too.
well, what I was thinking was that, you know, Great America is going to be redeveloped at some point. So it seemed like there would be an opportunity there to do it on some of that land that is going to be, and the same thing with the parking lot that Hetch Hetchy goes over. That's that Great America parking lot, which will eventually be redeveloped. So that would be a great opportunity to try to build a continuous trail if SFPUC will even let us do it.
Right. In the case of the 49ers and the parking lot at Great America, what happened there, right, is an elevated levee, and essentially they backfilled against that levee and brought earth in. So there's no drop off, there's no grade change there. That was to facilitate patrons coming to the stadium. But anywhere else along Santa Masakino on the north side, where you have a constructed, elevated, FEMA certified levee, it's still a trapezoidal levee, earthen, with a little bit of concrete lining in some places. And unless you backfill against this, you just can't do that. You literally have to bring the trapezoid out and build the whole foundation up. And engineering wise, that's a feat. And you'd also be taking land from private property owners to do that.
Certainly,
Where you have
See
new
that.
development agreements, Yeah, you have an opportunity to potentially do that.
Okay, and then my last question is that along the San Tomas Aquino Trail, we have a big sound wall abutting the private property owners. There's a big concrete wall along lots of San Tomas Aquino. And what I see is there's not enough openings in there for side streets to empty onto that trail for people that live behind that. So I'm thinking, are we going to build walls along these trails? There are walls at Cabrillo, yeah. Cabrillo, yeah.
This is on the San Tomas Aquino Creek Trail.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
you're good. Now I'm going back in history here. So those are walls that are people's backyards.
Yeah, so I was wondering, as we build these trails,
Yeah,
are we going to build walls along these trails?
only if needed. I
Okay.
mean, in some places you physically can't build a wall because you've got an elevated. In some places there are walls because there were on Calabasas there are a lot of walls because of they had to raise the height of the levee and they chose to put a wall in for
I see.
flooding instead. So it'd be site specific. But I'll make a general comment for Valley Water. And in our work with Valley Water, they have asked that we control access to the top, to the levee or to any trail along their water courses. So that's different than Hetch Hetchy. So that access in and out of the trail is logical and defined, and they're not all these backdoor accesses onto the trail that become a maintenance issue for them in trying to maintain their facilities. So when we think about phasing and reaches, we're trying to make really good logical connections and not necessarily having mid-block, let me call them that. Let me call them mid-block access points.
Because there are very long stretches where there's no access from the south.
Yes, and you know, if there were a particular area where we had some public right of way and not a private residence, we might be able to think about making a modification to that trail. But that's outside the scope of this
I
master
get it, I
plan.
get it. I was just thinking that if we were going to do the same walls on some of these trails, we want to make sure we think about that.
You know, the trail, the San Tomas Aquino really did not build any of those walls. They were all there. Some of the ones that were along the expressway were sound barrier walls. Others were backyard fences. Yeah, so the trails generally don't build walls unless there's a flood reason.
Okay, great, thank you.
I just wanted to follow up. You had talked about flooding, and that was a reason not to put something somewhere. I do know many times in the winter, the San Tomas Aquino Trail, they'll block off some of those and we have to close it anyway. And that to me isn't necessarily a reason not to have something somewhere that we'd have to block it off when it is flood, when we have a lot of water, because we already have that.
Right. So if you put something in the channel that changes the cross-sectional area, that becomes a flood impediment. And most of these creeks are at capacity. I mean, Calabasas, which we are working on, you know, they built those big flood walls. They did those for a reason because of the increasing urbanization and covering with hard surfaces throughout the valley. We have had increasing peak volumes. We haven't really seen one in a while, right? But when it comes, there changes. Those walls were intended, and those are tall. I mean, you're at the levee and that wall I can barely peer over. So think about the mass of water that would come down, right? So again, you have to be really careful because we can't do anything that would disrupt the flow of the maximum event, which is a 100-year event, is what we designed for. Yep.
All right, these are in no particular order. some of the existing at-grade crossings are pretty challenging right now. I think Agnew and probably Monroe are still in our 2018 bike plan. I think there's a lot of opportunities to improve on those, on those kinds of spots with just design changes that should be, feasible with, kind of reasonable measures. But a lot of those trail crossings are kind of challenging right now.
These are on Santa Monica.
These are on Santa Mas, yeah. What I'm mentioning them now because if we're going to do a bunch more like that, let's learn from the ones that we have. And I would actually throw Walsh into that. That's an undercrossing, but everybody who works at NVIDIA has to cross the creek to get there. And so there's a bunch of just strange maneuvering going on. We talked about this just a minute ago, but I would rather have a trail that floods half a dozen times during a wet season than no trail and no undercrossing. Especially Santa Clara seems to get around to cleaning it pretty promptly, which is unlike San Jose.
Right.
San Jose Trails does have a trail toolkit that I think might have been Eve City put together, and it's a really good document. I think it's still out there online. And one of the things that he was trying for, at least, was a 12-foot trail right of way with like 2 feet of gravel on either side. And I realize that's, there are constraints. I was going to say something about lights if Suds didn't, which is that if we're serious about keeping the creek corridors dark, some of the neighbors have a lot to answer for. Levi's and NVIDIA in particular at the moment. There are the piece of trail lighting that I like, which is not on the trail, but it's this ramp down to Augustine in Santa Clara Square. It's fairly new. New being, within the past 10 years, maybe. It has these sort of waist-high bollard kind of lights that are directional. And that's kind of just enough to see that that's there, see where you're going, see if there's anybody on it. While we're talking a little bit about the Santa Monica Creek Trail, it's been my observation that the part of the problem on the north end is not just that it's congested, but that the edges are crumbled. So if there's any way to kind of rebuild the edges, I know there's pavement.
Can I ask a question on
Yes.
that? The way that trail was designed is there's the main trail with a striping, and then there's
It sort of is-
chevrons out to the
yeah.
side, which were, quote, the shoulders. And is it crumbling into the chevrons?
I think it's crumbling in spots. It's crumbling past those.
Oh, my. Oh,
I think there are plans to redo the paving in the next
Okay.
year or two. But maybe get together before you sign off on that. And
well, I'll tell you what I'm hearing from all of your comments is you might consider a San Tomas Aquino TLC capital improvement plan that's funded to modify Monroe, Agnew, make any little changes, make sure that pavement is up to speed, any areas that are, it's routine. I'm sure you guys have slurry sealed and done things like that. But if you're starting to get some crumbling, and, it would be interesting because it's the most well-used facility, I think, in the city. And if you're starting to have some of that, I know signage has faded and the city's asked us for some of the original artwork. And sometimes you just need to put a little bit of money aside and fix that. And, you know, ask everybody who's using those facilities regularly and just do a small, I call it tender loving care for the creek trail.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's some pavement work planned for that
Yes.
section pretty soon,
Yep.
which is part of why I'm mentioning it.
Yep.
One of the things I see on that north section with the chevrons off to the sides is that when there's a lot of mixed traffic, people walking will actually use the chevron area as kind of a
Exactly.
sidewalk.
Exactly.
So one solution is to, lean into that and decide if that's what we want or if we should divide a
You know,
pedestrian side and a bike side or
when
whatever.
you restripe it, you could stripe it differently. You could put footprints instead of chevrons.
Yeah.
We did chevrons because it trains the eye to stay in the trail. There's a reason for it. We also paved the entire essentially top of the levee so the trail is wider than 10 feet in areas at Valley Water's request. So you'd have a good pavement surface for their maintenance vehicles. So the trail is a bit wider. And I know because it's so well loved, even that is not enough, right? In these high traffic areas, but we have to get along with what we have to use. But you could rethink that if you're gonna resurface and restripe.
So my next comment here is I have in fact shopped for groceries via the trail, the Whole Foods up there. And the related Santa Clara Park that is going in south, no, I'm gonna get this wrong, north of 101, kind of in the Freedom Circle area, I think is counting on the trail to be the non-driving access to Whole Foods and all of that stuff. So
Are they gonna help pay for them?
I don't recall.
It's certainly a strong nexus, right? Because it's gonna help their
Oh,
residents.
that's Irvine, sorry. It just occurred to me. I'm wondering if anybody here knows the status of the Hetch Hetchy segment that's directly adjacent to the Kylie project that was just approved. The Democracy Way, Mission Point.
So
Yes.
that Kylie project, they did include a trail on their property, so it
Okay.
wouldn't be on the Hetch Hetchy right away.
So it's adjacent to the Hetch Hetchy right away.
Yes, it's
Okay.
not on the Hetch Hetchy.
More comments here. I think the Eddie Souza Park, which is the one right at Monroe in that sort of funny little triangle by the expressway, is actually a very good example of a park trail interface. And the reason that I say that is that there's bike traffic, there's through bike traffic on the trail. There's a sort of a soft separation between the trail and the park mostly. And then the conflict point is pretty focused, but it's also there's good sight lines and stuff. So if somebody's little kid needs to go down there and see the ducks or something, it's pretty well controlled. They're not going to be scrambling through the bushes and the little rail fence. They're going to come out at that spot and you can kind of be watching for that. So that to me is a good example of how we do that. I would personally like to see more trail connections to adjacent uses. So the example that ramp down to Augustine is a good example. It prevents people who are trying to go to Whole Foods or any of that stuff there from having to go all the way out to Scott Boulevard, which is kind of a freeway. and so forth and so on. And there are a lot of places, that's one of the places that I've seen a good, just sort of mid-block connection. One of the others is one of the older office buildings. There's not much of a slope and it's probably not ADA, but there's a gate in the fence and a little trail through the dirt, and the bike shed is right back there in their parking lot. And again, that prevents anybody from having to go all the way out to one of these main
Just a quick
arterials.
question on that particular one. Is that north of 101 where there's an elevated levee, or is it an at-grade setting?
That's, I want to say that's maybe south of Scott,
Oh, yeah,
something like that.
okay.
So it's fairly level.
It's
Uh,
fairly level because they backfilled a little bit in that
Yeah,
area. Yeah.
it's fairly level to
got
the
it.
parking lot. So but that's the cheap solution,
Right,
right?
and if we're to do something for Valley Water's benefit, is you don't want people running up and down the backside of the levee because it eventually wears it away, right? So it needs to be formalized so that you don't deteriorate their levee, and that is one of their concerns. But I hear you, where if it's so circuitous to get out and around, that it may be, and if you have such a density of people, then it may
Yeah.
be.
It's not
worthwhile.
the distance, it's the having to go, from a nice separated facility with all this nature out onto
Busy street.
a big busy street. That's the tough part. I have a bunch of other older comments, but
I would encourage any of you who've written comments, send them in. Because some of these comments, we're trying to write them down and
Yeah.
capture them, and we've got a recording. But I'll take them to heart in the draft that comes out. Because your comments are really good and really detailed and substantive.
yeah, I have these in an email draft already. I will do at least one more here. So creek trails like the Santa Moss are some people's commutes, including my own. I have opinions on the last event, the last Super Bowl detours, if anybody here wants to hear them, but my ongoing frustration commuting on the creek trail is that they seem to be acknowledged as transportation when we are trying to get environmental points for some development or for building them in the first place. And we're getting people out of their cars, yay. And then when it's necessary to close a trail for whatever reason, be it event or maintenance or whatever, the assumption just turns into, oh, well, people can rearrange their jogging routes. And that's not really the case. If we had to close a city street for cars for a month, you'd be hearing about it. So,
Came second. In the
Yeah.
sense that many of these facilities are flood control facilities. And if they've got to do major flood control work, that's part of the joint use that the city has. There's no way around it. Mind you, it doesn't happen too often, but I understand. And we often try to, sometimes even in a master plan, we'll try to look down the road at what even might be the short-term detours. And they're not always the best. Sometimes they're a lot longer, but we did come second.
yeah, I think part of the answer is also to look at the on-street options and to improve those so that when
Well, that's what I mean by detours,
Yeah.
right? They're good, better on-street options.
when we
so
do end
we
up
get-
on, because we closed a chunk of the Santa Mosaquina Creek Trail a year and a half ago, September, for an entire month while they took out that little footbridge over to Intel. And in the meantime, all of us had the choice of Great America Parkway or Lafayette or maybe Montague, which, none of those are It did. It was 25 days instead of 30, but it did.
The temporary.
We heard about that a bit at the time, yeah.
So like one thing we could do for like, kind of planning for temporary closures or that sort of thing is like an example is that Mission College Boulevard and Santa Monica, where there's an normal underpass, but then there's, the off ramp off the trail, so to speak, that goes to Mission College. And, it's meant that you would access, the correct direction that you would need. But there's also a small crosswalk or a cutout of the median that can be used as a makeshift crosswalk across, at grade of Mission College Boulevard. So if, let's say, the underpass was closed, or if it was flooded, you could still make that thing, or if there's construction of that on that underpass, you could put in a temporary signal at that makeshift crosswalk and make that into a temporary facility that could be used. So something like those sorts of like where there's room, where there's that feasibility, maybe we can think ahead and be like, let's see, it's kind of like a bypass lane or something like that, where we can like, build that in as an option.
I'll read one more comment here and then email you the rest of this, but I expect you already know this, but trails produce returns way beyond their costs to build in much the same way that parks do. And more, because they're also transportation, but people get a place to exercise and de-stress and see nature, and generally trails improve physical and mental health, and community health in general. Commuting on the Santa Monica Creek Trail has saved me thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of car miles, and the need to own an additional car for, both myself and my husband. And I get to see the tides come and go in the lower creeks, and have learned to identify many of the birds and other critters that reside there. And I know I'm not the only trail commuter who picks up litter and reports larger problems when I see them. So I think trails can be a net benefit to the environment. I will.
Yes, sorry. Thank you for your patience. We do have one guest online with the iPhone. I see your hand is raised. I'm gonna allow you to talk.
This is Linda. Hello.
Hi, Lisa. Thank you. Thank you for waiting.
And
Can hear
I
you.
had multiple comments. One is that El Camino is actually state run. So that's one of the reasons that the school district doesn't have kids cross El Camino, is because it is state run, and they make sure so left turners intersect with straight bikers or walkers. And be careful there. Second thing is the person who was concerned about lights or wanting lights. I was hiking in not Highway 9, but Skyline to the Sea, hiking out, and it was still dark. I had to work. And so I realized that turning the flashlight on meant that I could see exactly where I was hiking, and then I couldn't see anything else. I actually did better having the light off and just using the moonlight and walking. It was a nice wide trail. It was not, I didn't have to worry about poison oak or anything else, but it's like, okay. And if you have to have lights, all mammals except us great apes don't see red. They see yellow and blue, but they don't see red. So if you have to have light, have it a little bit of a red light, just to light up things if you have to. like the bollards that you were talking about. Last thing is, let's see, I live very close to Calabasas and Monroe. The Monroe and San Tomas, they are redoing right now. It is a mess. It is a horrible mess. I hope that they will be having it more friendly to bikes later. Right now, I don't know what they're doing, but they are redoing street lights, signal lights, etc. And I just am avoiding that area if I can. The other one is the Monroe/Reed/Lawrence. That intersection is a mix between all three intersect of City of Sunnyvale, City of Santa Clara, County of Santa Clara. And it is a big headache to get anything done at that place just because it's three different agencies and everybody points at everybody else to do anything. I did manage to get through and lengthen the time that the signal light for walkers crossing Lawrence, because it was a very short signal for walkers and a lot of people had been killed over the years. So they lengthened that, but that was a county thing. And that should do it, I think.
Thank you for your comments. We wrote them down.
There is one comment from Jim online. I'm just gonna read it out loud. Concerning the crumbling edges of the Santa Moss Trail, the design showed a perfect flat top and perfect 135-degree angle to the slope. In reality, the edges were rounded, making the plan width impossible. I believe Jim used to work at the city, so he's providing some clarification. We did the best possible to get the full width, but the edges were not supported as much as we all wanted. This is why the edges crumble. So thank you, Jane, for providing the comment. That was all from online attendees.
Thank you. Thank you all for your comments. We wrote them down. We really appreciate you taking the time to give us your feedback, give us your questions. It's something for the design team to look into, and we'll look at that. And as we said, we'll have upcoming meetings, and we'll take a deeper dive in each one of the corridors. Really appreciate you spending some time of your night with us tonight.